España es aire, aire y sol. 1, 2, 3, 30, 300 días de sol al año, y campos y mares, y un ancho océano. España es tierra de molinos que doman el viento. Desde siempre, nación de viento, sol, de tierra ancha y aguas profundas. Un país de energía inagotable que apuesta por desplegar sus recursos naturales para acelerar la transición ecológica y crecer de forma sostenible y descarbonizada gracias a ese potencial privilegiado. Somos el 8º país con mayor potencia renovable instalada y el 2º en Europa. Casi la mitad de la generación eléctrica nacional ya es renovable. Un sector con más de 111.000 empleos que se triplicarán en esta década. Y ya somos el 10º mercado más atractivo en el mundo para inversiones en energía verde. En el nuevo modelo energético que destierra los combustibles fósiles, el ciudadano se erige en actor principal. En España el autoconsumo se ha multiplicado por 10 desde 2017 y el mapa de las comunidades energéticas crece cada día. España ha situado el clima y la energía en el centro de una transformación integral para lograr la neutralidad climática en 2050. Una economía de bajas emisiones competitiva y eficiente que asegure la soberanía energética con recursos limpios y propios y garantice la protección de los hogares. Esta transición debe ser justa con las personas y los territorios. La premisa es no dejar a nadie atrás, creando alternativas innovadoras, manteniendo el empleo y la población con inversiones ligadas a la economía verde, con diálogo y participación ciudadana. En este camino a la descarbonización, SHPITSBERG 23 arranca como foro para crear sinergias y sumar voces de alto nivel al debate de cómo encajar las piezas en el diseño del futuro energético, para ahondar juntos en este reto común con un diálogo constructivo y pleno de aciertos. El mundo nos está mirando.
Buenos días. Damos comienzo a la primera sesión en este segundo día de SHPITSBERG. Hoy iniciamos con esta sesión titulada Energías renovables para el desarrollo social y económico de todos. Modera Anabel Sánchez. Esperamos que os resulte interesante.
Bueno, hello, good morning everybody, and it's very nice to see you here. Let me invite, please, my speakers to come. Let me invite Anna SHPITSBERG, Deputy Assistant Secretary from the U.S. Department of State. GLORIA MAGOMBO, please. She is Secretary for Energy and Power Development from the Ministry of Energy and Power Development of Zimbabwe. ALICIA MONTALVO, please. She is Manager of Climate Action and Positive Biodiversity from the Development Bank of Latin America. I don't think we have Kandeh Yumkella with us today, but if he is around, please let us know. We also have Nelson LAGE, President from the European Energy Network and President of the Portuguese Energy Agency. PAOLO FRANKL, please join us. PAOLO is Head of Renewable Energy Division from the International Energy Agency. I'm not sure we have IBRAHIM YACOUBOU because I think he just arrived, so he may join us very soon. Please, Mr. ROMEO MIKAUTADZE, Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia. Thank you very much for joining us. So we are going to talk about something which is very important for all the countries where we are all working. It's about the social and economic development for all and how renewable energies can help us to reach that. We know that the number of people without electricity in the world has unfortunately increased. In 2020, 20 million new people don't have access to energy, reaching nearly 775 million people without access to energy. So this is our first challenge that, of course, we all need to do our best to meet it. But we also have climate change and the Paris Agreement, and the objective of not increasing average temperature of the world beyond 1.5. So we all need renewable energies, and we need to speed up implementation. If now we focus on the implementation phase, then there are a number of questions that come up to all of our minds. For example, what's the role of the private and the public sector? What happens with the public support? We all know that in many countries where renewable energies are increasing very fast, mostly in Europe, local communities are having some issues with those investments. So we need to make sure that there is an adequate participation of local communities. We need different type of energy projects to usual or to more traditional type of setting, like the community energy projects, where the community owns the energy installations. So we need to talk about that, how we can change, or should we change the rules to make sure that renewable energies are working better for all of us, are benefiting all better. Finally, we will talk about a couple more things. International finance. We, of course, need to make sure that the international finance is available for all those people that I mentioned at the beginning without access to energy. But we will also talk about just transition. We know that not everybody will be benefited by this energy transition. There will be millions and millions of new jobs around the world. So we will need skilling, reskilling, upskilling projects. We need to understand that well, how that's going to work, and also how we can make sure that we have local development, renewable industry in all different places, or how we are going to deal with that. So in order to address all these very difficult, complex, and diverse questions, I have my excellent panel here with me. And I would like to start with PAOLO Frank from the International Energy Agency. And I would like to ask you, first of all, something a little bit broader to understand better what's the challenge that we are facing. What needs to be done? What needs to be put in place to ensure that society and economy underpin the transformation on the energy system to renewables?
Thank you very much, Anna. And first of all, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting the IEA. I'm very honored to represent it in this high-level plenary. Allow me just 1 minute to set this in the right context. First of all, we are in the first truly global crisis. The number of countries that have an inflation rate higher than 6% is exactly as high as it was in the 70s, which means almost 100% of the countries, in particular in the developing world. But the most important thing is this crisis is hitting the more vulnerable more than the others. It has an asymmetric impact. And the high energy prices, the energy security is hitting some countries more than others. And you mentioned the fact that for the first time, the energy access data went in the wrong direction. Now, can renewables help in this situation? Yes, of course they can. They are the cheapest option of energy almost everywhere, and indeed we see a boom of renewables coming in the next 5 years, but not everywhere. And I insist, not everywhere. So just to give you one number, we forecast renewable power capacity to expand by 2,400 gigawatts in the next 5 years. To put this in context, this is the total amount of power capacity of China. So the world is adding a renewable China to the system. And it is also equal in the next 5 years of all the renewables that were added in the last 20 years. But not everywhere. And the extreme case is Africa. So Africa will grow, is accelerating, but it's only 2% of the total growth in the next 5 years. We have to change this and radically change it. So coming to your question very, very shortly, 4 things are needed. First, a good, predictable policies. Policy is at the same time the main driver, but also main barrier if it is not predictable. Second, plan and invest in infrastructure. PV plants are booming everywhere, but the grids need 10 years to be built and planned. So have this. Third, the cost of financing and the investment risk precisely in Africa or in emerging economies is much higher than anywhere else. The cost of financing can be 2 times, 3 times higher in developing economies than in the advanced economies in China. So look at those risks. And the fourth, most important than anything, look at the whole socio-economic impacts. Both the benefits that the renewables and the clean energy transition can bring, and the negative impacts of those who will lose the job because, for instance, they are working in coal mining. We have to think about those as well. We need to have a people-centered transition because otherwise this becomes a main barrier. I'll stop it here for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you touch upon very important issues. So the inequality in the world and how access to renewable energy costs not the same in some part of the world than the others, and Africa, and this 2%, which is a striking figure. So let me now turn to Gloria. Please, Gloria Magombo from Zimbabwe, from the Ministry of Energy of Zimbabwe, tell us, how do you see that? How do you see we can transform this energy system to renewables and make sure that this is benefiting all?
Good morning, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate and speak as Africans. I think there's a lot of times when a lot of people speak on our behalf. But when we talk about energy transition as Africans, especially if you look at the additional 20 million you talked about, which is having no access to modern energy, is transition from traditional fuels. People who are still in the first industrial revolution who have to leapfrog to the current status of having modern access to renewable energy. We are looking at people who are cooking using open fires and firewood, which is no longer even there because there's been deforestation which has happened over the years. So what is it which hasn't been done? Because the question was, what is it which needs to be done? As Africans, we did go on the bandwagon to do the policies, change our laws, do regulatory frameworks, create new institutions which can allow for new private sector participation in infrastructure. When traditionally infrastructure had been developed through developmental banks at less cost, and we thought that the money would come, the funding hasn't come. So what needs to happen is the funding has to come to Africa to help us to move and not be left behind. Because whatever we are doing now is further alienating Africa, especially if you look at what has happened in the past 2 years. We had the pandemic, which disrupted the supply chains. All projects which were supposed to be done couldn't be done. We then have the energy crisis, which came as part of the geopolitics of Europe, but it's affecting everyone. The crisis is affecting everyone. So for us to ensure that we have programs which allow for the true well-being of people and Africans in particular, we need to be given access to finance, and finance which does not have conditionalities. There's too many conditions to finance, and it has to be affordable finance. And I think I'm happy my predecessor spoke to the fact that we are accessing finance at 3-4 times higher than those who already have achieved universal access. We are still talking about communities which don't have access. So we need to work together to make sure that is there. The other issue, apart from the incentives and all the things which we have put in place, is to be part of the value chains. I think one issue which has not been spoken about a lot is that a lot of critical minerals which are part of the renewable energy technologies are there in Africa, but they are being exported in their raw form, and there is no value addition to create the ability for Africa to generate its own income so that we are able to pay for these technologies ourselves. We really don't need people to give us handouts. What we want is to be part of this cake. And when we are talking about lithium in a country like Zimbabwe, we have come up with a regulation to say you cannot export raw lithium outside Zimbabwe. There has to be some form of value addition, and we are looking at all the critical minerals, whether it's copper, nickel, the rare earth minerals. Everything is there in Africa and in abundance, but it's not being value added, which has disempowered us as Africans to be able to accept this. And we believe that the renewables are the way to go. We have abundant energy resources in terms of in their raw form, but without the conversion to usable energy, which is what we want, we will not be able to proceed. And I think we want to be at the table. We want to be part of a new way of looking at issues and not continue doing the same things every year, and then we wonder why the statistics are going south.
Okay.
So for me, that's really a definition of insanity, and as the world, we need to change the way we are doing things.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so many things now, so many challenges ahead of us. So it's about finance, it's about how we use critical mineral in an adequate manner, that it's also giving value back to the countries where the minerals are, and we all need it for the clean technologies. No, thank you. We will talk about all this in the next question, so I think that were very good opening remarks from both Gloria and Paolo. So let me now turn to Anna, please. Anna SHPITSBERG from the US Department of State. Let's gonna talk about how we can make sure that all these opportunities that we know in terms of new business, new jobs, etc., can also have this implementation at the local level. So what is necessary to build up manufacturing renewable energy-based goods, etc., to create local value for economic and society everywhere? What do you think?
Thank you, and thank you for that question. I think, the first thing I want to point out is that the importance of what you just said, I think, has only crystallized in many policymakers' minds over the last few years. And that is one, that renewables offer us energy security, energy independence that needs to be leveraged. But everything that goes into it is not. If we look at onshore wind, we require about 9 times the amount of minerals as we do for a natural gas plant. That opens up risk. It opens up bottlenecks for our ability to achieve deployment rates at the timeline that we need to address the climate crisis. And 2, goes to what Gloria just said, and that is that energy has the ability to not just significantly boost economic growth because of its supply, but because it as an industry can boost economic growth. And so now more than ever, we have countries and partners come to us and say, we want value creation. We don't want to sit at the upstream side of this. We know that the money is not in the upstream side, the growth, the potential for our workers, that's not where it sits. We need it across the board. And I'm a strong believer that to build out anything, we need to actively value it. And for that, I mean that it's not easy. It's not a 1-2 punch to create a supply chain and a value chain, especially in commercial technologies where you've achieved manufacturing efficiency in a certain region. At the same time, we have an amazing opportunity because, to Paulo's point, the increase in capacity that's about to happen for clean technologies and renewables is so significant that there is an opportunity to come into the space. And we know we also have bottlenecks where we can have technologies handicapped by natural disasters, by logistics, by labor, by all sorts of health issues these days that we need to diversify. That creates an opportunity. What else creates an opportunity is that there is a demand for diversification of product and differentiation of product. It's important to remember that we're building out renewables to address climate change and protect the environment. So how those renewables are made and what goes into them is important. It's important that they do not damage the environment in that process, which means there is an opportunity for creating products and value chains that adhere to certain values. And so with that, it's important for us as investors, as off-takers, to demand a value chain and a supply chain that adheres to the principles. We're building out in the US a significant amount on the supply chain side, more than we've ever done before, but we're also working with partners. We're working, for example, through our mineral security partnership to take the largest investors, donors, off-takers, and essentially say, we need to support projects together that adhere to ESG values and that will actually help countries benefit from their geological endowment. We need to help across the chain, not just to promote projects in the upstream, but the midstream, the processing, the refining, the recycling, the final plants. We need to be a part of that, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. So that's something that I think we're now, as policymakers, proactively implementing.
Thank you very much. So this is what we need. We need to create a value change, local value change for all of us, well, all of us, for all who can benefit it from us. And we need partnerships. We'll talk later about that, about how the private and the public system can work together. Let me now turn to Mr. ROMEO, Minister from Georgia. How do you see that? What do you think about this issue of creating local value change at the local level to make sure that the benefits keep increasing at the community level?
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, it's my pleasure to be here in such a big conference. Thank you, SPAREC. Thank you, Brain 21, to organize this conference. Of course, it's a very familiar thing for Georgia. I start from beginning. In 2017, when Georgia merged two ministers, Ministry of Energy and Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development. After this, and we received advice from IMF, International Monetary Fund, and also Ministry of Finance to restrict PPA support scheme in Georgia. And after these 5 years, we constructed it's very smiling numbers, but in each year, 20 megawatts or 15 megawatts or like this, very small amounts. And if we are talking about Georgia, Georgia has a huge potential of hydro sources. We utilize only 20% of our hydro sources, and most of these hydro sources is medium size and small size. It means huge potential of renewable sources, and because we don't have some support scheme, we can't utilize these sources. And what we received, I think, instead of our colleague mentioned about fiscal risks in budget, and we received, I think, a more dangerous situation. This is independence, yes, and we every day, every year, our consumption increase and increase. And it means our dependence also in neighbor countries, and you know where is located Georgia. It's very beautiful, but also very strong political issue. Yes, around we have 500 borders with Russia, and now we think about it. And after 2022, government launched new support scheme, how we can extract and how we can invest money in energy sector and utilize our sources and therefore get our energy security. Of course, on this way, it's very important to be close with your population, to close with local population, and trying to explain why this development and why this energy transition, this renewable sources, it's very important for country. Last year we have 10% of economic growth. It means, of course, economic growth and energy growth, it's same numbers. And we're preparing communication strategy with the local population. We plan to explain some awareness raising local population and be more close with population, because for example, we launched in 2016 a project name called net metering system. It means under 500 kilowatt household also can generate it to cover self-consumption, and also if it will be some enough electricity to sell directly distribution company without transmission fee. It's also a very good example to what are the benefit of these activities. And we are on this way, and we try our best to explain and utilize our sources, because if we are talking about energy security, it's not only energy security. And all of us recognize that this is more than energy security and not simple work.
We have to work on the energy efficiency and also work on the regional integration from the energy point of view, and we hope to talk about the electrification of the system as well. Right now, in transport, maybe is the sector that has the greatest amount of emissions, and the electrification will be very complex and requires a lot of investment. So the most important thing is to give clear signals, but also contribute with the funding and the energy and also the regulatory frameworks. That's where we are supporting all these different institutional capabilities, but also being aware that this transition, for instance, goes through the use of gas as a replacement fuel. And for taking into account as well that the energy matrix, its hydroelectrical component, is very vulnerable to the impact of climate change. So we believe that we have to see the problem from an overall perspective. The transition generates greater poverty because climate change is generating poverty as well. The societies can't have the perception that they suffer the impact of climate change and they suffer the impact of the transition towards more cleaner models. We believe it's very important to manage very well the policies to really generate economic opportunities, employment opportunities, so there is not a dual vulnerability, the one that comes from the climate change and the one that comes from the transition to cleaner models. At that respect, I would like to emphasize the fact, the role that the region is playing as well in the international supply chain. We are those who supply raw materials that are very intensive in energy consumption. So when we talk about the transition for all, we have to talk all from the point of view as well of what would be the impact of an intervention in the energy supply in Latin America, the impact on the production of the raw materials and the agricultural products that are feeding other markets right now. Very often, this is not introduced in the international debate. In fact, we have to talk about transition towards a clean energy, but also of the need that we keep on producing what is necessary for all the countries, and especially right now when there is the supply chains at the international level are so fragile. Latin America wants to be a stable region of production of clean energy, but also where there is security and safety in the supply, not only of energy, but also the products that require energy to be marketed later. So we believe that it is very important, that the task of the public institutions is very important. All these conditions that are facilitating, but we also have to bear in mind the different sensitivities of the private sector, not only the energy one, but everything that is meant by the fragility of the supply chains right now.
Thank you very much. I think we're seeing the huge differences between regions. Before we were talking about Africa and the huge gap of people without energy access. We've also talked about the wealth of critical minerals and how it can become a local value. Now we've been talking about Latin America with a totally different situation, very few emissions, but despite it, they needed to do this shift, particularly in transport, and there's the strong extractive power which is necessary to continue working. Decarbonization is also another great opportunity for them, so all these investments and companies on Latin America part and parcel of the international green value chain. Thank you, Alicia.
Let me ask the same to you, Nelson. LAGE, what do you think should be the role of public and private sector to play? I mean, what should play the role to ensure local communities benefit from the deployment of renewable energies?
Bueno, buenos días. También hablaré en español.
I'm going to speak Spanish, and we're going to be rather disruptive, you know, in the format of the panel. I think it's okay if you speak Spanish. First of all, I'd like to thank Zurich for the invitation to greet the illustrious members of the panel who are up here with me. And I'd like to say that, in brief, to achieve carbon neutral neutrality, to date, we actually need a revolution. We need a revolution with the true meaning of the word. We need urgent changes. We need to mobilize a lot of people. We needed to mobilize a whole energy sector. And we also needed to start producing locally, to have production close to us with the active involvement of citizens. And we are all called to do this: companies, the private sector, institutions, the population, citizens, R&D, academia. We are all asked to become involved and lead this revolution. As far as the private sector and the state are concerned, I would say that the state needs to continue along these lines, issuing legislative measures that will adapt to the actual situation of each country. And I said this before I came in. They needed to make sure that we can implement what we actually require, that is to say, measures that are reliable, flexible, and that will allow us to have real energy policies. At the same time, we have to provide economic support to projects. That's what they have to do. So we need good legislation, but at the same time, we need good funding so that we can carry out this revolution. The private sector has to focus on new technological approaches, new disruptive solutions. Because the truth of the matter is, these are times where you have to guarantee supply among states, energy storage if we want to produce more in Europe. If we want to be self-sufficient in Europe, then we're going to have to decide what we're going to do with the energy, where we're going to store it. And it's very, very important for the private sector to be able to guarantee this as well. With all of this, we can develop new business models that will make involvement of the local level in production. And I think that it touches something that we haven't said before. The public sector, private sector have to create projects and ideas that will share, consume, store, and sell. So we're talking about renewable and self-consumption communities, and that's why it's so important that during the revolution, the new way of working with energy and renewable energies play an essential role. And why? Because they are essential for the energy transition process. They're essential to induce change in the electricity networks, conventional ones, and for the smart grids. Communities can allow to promote further the changes. So we move towards smart grids, adding value and, of course, contributing with security of supply. But they're also extremely important to democratize access to energy. They're important advantages both at a social and economic level, like we said before. And they're also a huge ally to fight against energy poverty. We have this problem in Portugal. I think that we're going to implement a long-term strategy as a test to tackle energy poverty, and communities are going to play a very important role in this struggle. At the same time, it promotes everything that has to do with territorial cohesion, proximity, local investments, like activating the scenario. That's why communities are so important. And it's also essential to reinforce the role of everybody, people, companies, an industry at large, so they become involved in this process for decarbonization and energy production. And it has to be cohesive, it has to be democratic, it has to create more employment. And this is a topic that we will talk about later on. We will talk about how to create employment and how to make energy attractive, and like you said before, how to further dynamize the economy. It's extremely important for the economy not to be a way of slowing down the process. We have to accelerate it and generate more employment. Very simple words, something about Portugal. About 80% of renewables is our aim for 2025. In January, we achieved 88%, and we're doing that because we're investing a lot in solar energy as well as in energy communities. We have a legislation that is quite new. It was enforced only 2 years ago, and it has already changed once, adapted to the situation, and it is in fact promoting a whole huge wealth of projects for high consumption amongst the communities, and therefore it's allowing the country to abide by the goals it has set for itself, and we are obtaining very positive results. And the intention is to invest more in solar energy and wind energy, to invest more in renewable energy communities, that is to say, to invest more in energy. And that's why I would say that this is the path that we're supposed to follow. And both the public and private sector have a determining role to play here, involving the citizen in this process. Thank you very much. I'd like to say that it's really interesting to see how we've been seeing different situations in different parts of the world. And now we're going to focus a little bit more on Europe, how Europe has made an important change in the past 2, 3, 4 years. A key change in the energy policy, the way of understanding energy policy, with a totally different approach, with these new ideas like the energy communities, which until very recently would have been unthinkable, so to speak. I'd like to focus on 2 key ideas about what you've said, because I believe that they can be extremely interesting for other countries and regions. Romeo, in fact, said this in his presentation. We are required to adapt measures to the current situation, which is changing, and we have to do so fast. And the intention of adapting and to find the best way to produce the renewables we need to struggle against climate change is important, but also to create employment, local employment, to accelerate the economy, particularly in awkward and difficult situations, because I think we're talking about situations that are similar between Spain and Portugal, rural areas. This is key. This is the current state of the art, and this is the situation we find ourselves involved now, and we're not letting things move forward, because frankly, the figures that you've given us from Portugal are absolutely amazing. We're going back into English.
Turn to English again, and then ask GLORIA from Zimbabwe again. Let's gonna keep talking about this idea of creating local value. You were in your introductory remarks, you were also talking about this idea of critical minerals and about how to access to finance in a greater way to make sure that your country and African countries are part of this energy revolution that is so much needed. Tell me a little bit more about that. How we can ensure public support? Is it an issue there in your country? Are there other societal barriers? Or it's okay, everybody's happy with the new projects? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much for that. I think when it comes to localization and using the local resources vis-a-vis the renewable energy technologies, there's recognition that there is certain developments which have happened in the past where even if we were to do our own research and development to try and compete against certain economies which have perfected the art of doing things like solar panels, we might not be able to get there at the right cost. But we also recognize that renewables are not just about solar PV. There's hydro, there's geothermal, there's other renewables where local resources, other than the critical minerals which feed into the development of the technologies. There are certain local resources which we believe are critical. So if you look at the Zimbabwean energy policy, it's very clear that when you come in to do renewable energy, there is need for you to use at least the local people. Try and employ as much of the local people as possible. You also need to see how much of the local resources can be included in your technologies or your new, because a lot of people are really more looking at jobs more than trying to say, not in my backyard. I think we are at a different level where someone is at a basic need, and those who have already enjoyed the benefits of modern energy and who are now saying, oh no, we don't want it this way, we'll prefer it that way. So we are at different levels. For us, it's employment creation, it's value creation in participation of the other local resources. I'll give you a typical example. If you are to build a large hydro dam, you will need, for the structures, steel, you will need aggregates, sand, you will need cement. So if you are building a large hydro in a country like Zimbabwe, we did a check in terms of if we are to build Batoka, which is 2,400 megawatts, we will create almost about 20,000 jobs. Just on mining of the iron and the processing of the chrome, the steel. I'll bring in the coal, where we will need the coking coal for the steel industry, the smelters, which provide jobs. We also need the cement companies, which have to produce the cement and create. So there's a whole economy which comes up from this project, which will span over a period of 6 years, but it will create a totally new development in the sector. We also recognize that when it comes to other renewables like solar, obviously local participation in terms of the actual technology might be minimal, but we want you at least the structures to try and use the local steel structures for you to, especially if you're doing ground mounted. And we have cable manufacturing companies which we believe can be upscaled and updated to ensure that the standard of cables they do will be appropriate for the technologies. So we believe that from our own societal norms, people want jobs. We have a lot of youth which we are churning into the job market which don't have jobs. So as long as a project and a technology is bringing in human development, people will be happy. The demand and the gap is so huge, so that it will be a mammoth task to say that we'll end up with stranded assets of any kind. Whatever we have now, we just need to upscale and improve. And we also believe that there's need to, for our technology partners to engage in technology transfer, which is genuine and allows people to actually be part of the, as a region. Zimbabwe is sitting right in Southern African continent, in the middle of that. We can be an assemble for solar panels, which will be supplying Zambia, Botswana, South Africa. So it's, the market is there, the demand is there. What we need is for the private sector to come in and we work together, whether through private-public partnerships or as private sector completely, to create these companies and structures which will allow for us to have a future for our youth which are struggling with jobs. And then the other issue about the local structures is that land culturally belongs to traditional chiefs. But we have seen that a lot of the new solar projects which are coming up in some of these rural communities are actually driven by these traditional leaders. What we have done is to empower them and give them the information they need. And they've seen it as a way of improving the quality of life within their communities. And they are so welcoming to these new technologies. And they also become part of the projects by giving certain value, either in form of land, or as a lease, or a total participation as equity into the projects. So that ability for the communities to participate in a small way, you evaluate the land, what does it cost into the new project, and find that ability to give the community a certain portion of that value apart from the normal social responsibility which will come with, you find that in some of these communities, there are schools, there are clinics which might not be electrified, and we'll expect those who come into those communities to also do certain social programs for the communities, building schools, electrifying them, building clinics, electrifying them, and that has actually brought in a lot of buy-in and cooperation and collaboration between the communities and the developers of these technologies. So, and the issue of creation of employment using local is quite critical, because once they are employed in those projects, they actually protect the assets against any form of vandalism or any destruction which can come from others who might want to steal. So we believe that the value of local resources cannot be overemphasized, starting from the real value at development of the technologies themselves, right to the implementation of the projects, to ensure that the participation of locals is done right from the environmental social impact assessments, how, if there's going to be any movement of people, how are they going to be compensated, and how are they going to be assured that once they leave their own homes, they'll be able to get something more comfortable than where they are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will talk about employment just in a little while, but let me now turn to you, Paolo, and let me ask you something about important that we have talked already about that. Tell me how we can accelerate international finance to ensure universal energy access.
So, in a nutshell, we have to make sure that more private capital goes to where it is mostly needed, which is in emerging economies and developing countries. And I think there are two key words. One is risk, and second is scale. On the first of all, we need to understand the risks. These are well known, and for you in particular, from country risk to off-taker risk, land, there are a number of things that governments can do. And I stress the importance of public policy. Good public policy is a precondition for everything that follows. There is no risk mitigation facility that can work if the policy is wrong. Then countries can do many things. Think about land. Think about what India has done with solar parks in India, which has been really, really a big motor. Or having auctions with very clear clauses about hard currency, termination, who is the repartition of funds. And then we can, when all this is done, there can be some guarantees mechanism. A new role of multilateral development banks will be very important in this transition. And I would like to mention that the IEA is working with the IFC exactly on this, with something that will be published in June. But the second aspect, to me, is even more important. And I would like to pick what Gloria said, the three parts. And it's linking renewables to a new form of economic development and industrialization in these countries. And I would sense three things. First, renewable is not just solar PV. There are a lot of industries with low, medium temperature heat requirements, like agro-food, textiles, where renewables, other forms of renewables that we never speak about, can be touched. My microphone goes.
Yeah, technicians coming.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Now, second, the supply chains. We are in a very different world from just 1-2 years ago, and there is a recognition of how this diversifying supply chain becomes a strategic interest for the whole world, which means someone in the rich countries is ready to invest money, to risk, because this is in our interest. So this is the second part. And Gloria also mentioned hydrogen. I would absolutely not underestimate this because of the scale. And this will take a big part of the off-taker risk away. Of course, the hydrogen plants need to be done in such a way that there are positive spillovers for the local economy, and then these spillovers will be key to make a local sustainable industry also for energy access and for the power system. This is our view. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo, for the good ideas for the public sector, for the private sector, and for the international development banks as well, and how to turn the whole ecosystem into jobs and these positive spillovers of this sustainable industry that can be developed linked to renewable energies. So let me turn now to Romeo. And what are your feelings? Well, how do you see that from Georgia about the same question? What should be the role of international finance in order to make sure that this transition goes faster, let's say? Yeah, tell us.
Yeah, thank you. I continue my answer because it's question is not same but similar. Yes, I talked, the main priority of Georgia's government is utilize our sources because we, the last December, government of Georgia launched new support scheme, CFD mechanism. It means contract for differences. Every person, every entity who wants to develop renewable sources in Georgia have opportunity to join auction and get and bid some acceptable tariff to get CFD contract for 15 years. Why it's important? Because for private sector, it's a long-term predictable situation and they feel safety, the important is. And of course, if, and I mentioned about the huge sources of hydro, not only hydro, if we develop hydro, it means we can additional sources of wind, solar, other renewables. But what we approved from IMF, it's totally 1,500 megawatt for CFD contract, and this 1,500 is 900 in hydro, 250 in solar, 250 in wind, and 50 megawatts in other renewables. I mean hydrogen, biomass, geothermal, etc., etc. And if we construct this, of course, it means it's not concluded in one area of Georgia. It means in every area of Georgia, we hope we'll have development. And of course, it means in these areas increase some values, increase job creation. It means to increase job creation. It means to then, of course, it's not only one activities from our government. The very important also activities is the sharing of tax, property tax. We, in close collaboration with Norwegian Water and Energy Sources Agency, and they have very good experience in Norway, how they share property taxes with local communities. It means of course, the taxi payers, of course, the property taxi goes directly in local municipality, but not in local community. And now we adopted a draft of law. It means the most part of this property taxi spent to this area, this renewable, planned renewable project area. It means also people who living in this area feel and get some profit, get some benefit from this, and this most of this tax, property tax, distributed to this local community. It's also very important. Also, I mentioned about it means also it helps to awareness rising and everything together. Yes, apologize. Everything together give us chance to be more energy security and decrease our dependence in neighbor countries.
Yes, thank you very much. I have here the remaining time in front of me, and we only have like a couple of minutes. And I wanted to touch about this employment issue and just transition and skilling and reskilling. And I wanted to ask you, how do you see that? It is a big issue when we talk about energy transition. We are doing that with the coal mining and the coal power plant sector in Spain, and we are very mindful about the difficulties and the opportunities that we have with that. Tell us a little bit more about your perspective on employment and jobs and just transition.
Absolutely, and skilling and reskilling, upskilling, it's all important. It will all be critical, it will all be necessary, but I will say I think the first most important thing is to understand what jobs will be available in the short term, in the long term, when we account for automation, temporally, geographically, is it actually aligned at the local level? We can't just tell someone, go move your family over here, you're going to do this for a short period of time. So we need to have a very clear understanding of what it means and how to address that. And that also needs to be reflected in how we're investing. So I was fortunate enough to lead a session on a transition that Irina organized at Sharm el-Sheikh. And one union representative said, training's not enough. People keep thinking training is enough. We need investment, and that's true. We need to invest in the jobs, and then we can train. And then we need to also make sure those jobs reflect our values in that investment. For those that follow the US market, you might have seen we passed our largest legislation to impact climate and clean energy in August, the Inflation Reduction Act. If you actually look at the details, out of the $369 billion that are to go into the energy sector, the majority of it is in tax incentives. To actually utilize the majority of those benefits, you would need to, almost all technologies, would need to actually meet labor provision on wages and apprenticeship. And there are bonus incentives if the projects are in communities that are considered energy communities, brown sites, communities that were dependent on fossil fuels for a very large portion of the jobs, low-income communities as well. It was built into it because there's a realization that the workforce transition is critical for the energy transition, and it's not easy. We have to be able to say it's a priority. And we do this internationally as well. The Just Energy Transition partnerships through which donors have put money together to be able to invest in energy transitions in key countries of high emission, those are also, the reason it has just in it is because the workforce component is core. So that's something, I'll end there because I know we're short on time, but I think at the end of the day, we always say, you know what people's priorities are based on where they spend their time and money. It's not any different for a company or a country.
No, thank you very much. So yeah, we don't have a lot more time. I wanted to ask the same question to you, Nelson. I don't know if you want to add something about jobs and just transition and the changing within the different economic sectors. And then I will give you the floor, just 1 minute, first of all to you, Alicia, to wrap up. Nelson,
muy rápido porque el tiempo.
Por favor, sí.
Very quickly, because we're running out of time. I would like to say that the development of renewables in the past few years has had a very positive and good impact in employment, and not only when it comes to industry, but in construction technology, and it's very visible. But it also means that decarbonization and new technologies need to move faster, but they have also created disruptions in the labor market. That's true. We have a new and huge challenge ahead of us, which is to bridge gaps. And we have to think about the existing work and jobs and the jobs that are required now by the market and the transition we are moving towards to. And I believe that is our main challenge ahead of us, to know what we have, what we need to make the most of what we already have and build upon that, something new. Let me give you an example. This is such an important topic that within the presidency of the EU in the ENER network for energy, we have carried out a study about the green jobs and how important green jobs are for the current situation and the contribution that can be made by the different energies when they define what's going to be the future of the labor market when we talk about energy. One of the conclusions that was reached is that it's important to invest a lot in information and training. In Portugal, we have launched the first national center for training in the energy transition. So we're going to have a center that's going to train in new professions for the energy transition, because it's the best way to bridge the gap to attract people who are still extremely valid and worthy and to provide them with new training. So we're going to build an organization which is of national scope. So we'll be investing in training, we'll be investing in the future, in brief, won't we? Because transition cannot be done without people. The economy cannot unfold without people. Renewables are for people, aren't they? Therefore, training is a comprehensive part of this process. And I believe that this means that we have to develop green jobs and that governments have to include training schemes in public policies. This is what we're doing in Portugal. I think Spain is doing the same. I think Europe is taking their steps forward, and I think that different energy agencies involved in the process are key to identify governments, in identifying, in training, in providing information. In ours, we have a training division that trains experts, but apart from the national center, we're going to continue with the training of other levels, not only the labor force, and I believe that both at a world level, at local level, whatever format you use, or legal institution solution you decide to find, that you need to invest in training in order to cover green jobs. Well, in Spain, we're doing something similar, so we fully agree with you, but we're focusing on people who are already members of the labor market in the Institute for Fair Transition and requalifying them, basically, which is particularly difficult in certain industries like the coal industry. It's very difficult to find, the right way for somebody who has to continue working for a few years and who needs the wages to support their family, to have a training space and have access to the economy. I believe this is one of our major challenges, so I agree completely with everything you've said. So, Alicia, if you don't mind, I'm going to give you the floor to close and adjourn the session. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your point of view? Do you think that at an international level, energy transition is working well with positive local development? Do you think that we need some changes or not? I believe we have to take a new glance at all of this. I think that the debate has been focusing on the view of European countries, where transition may be quite advanced and we have the right incentives. Nevertheless, I do believe that we have to focus on energy diversity. And I don't think that we have worked hard enough on knowing which is the role that's got to be played by other regions, like Africa, but of course Latin America. We need to bridge the time gap. I think that multilateral institutions somehow need to reinforce the risk mitigation side of things, but not only the economic one, but also the social one. It's important that to remember that you've got to be careful with the fragility of social structures in many countries where the energy issue is going to create complex situations to manage. And it's not always included in this discussion or debate. And it's more focused on Europe, like the mechanism for compensation border schemes, which obviously may have a very, very negative impact on the economies of other countries if you don't provide the necessary aid or do the right investment. I think that geopolitical stability has also got to be included in this process. And regulations have to be consistent, because sometimes we hear messages where you hear people saying one thing and then doing another thing. And from within Latin America, we are confused. And it's viewed with confusion. I don't think it's right. I think that we've got to convey clear images, and wherever we go, give information and training. But it's also quite true that there is certain inconsistency in the messages given as well as in the actions done, which is not good. But please never separate the energy discussion from the political and environmental one and social one. Well, thank you very much to all the members of the panel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
And enjoy the rest of the sessions that we have ahead of us. Thank you.
Con esta mesa redonda terminan las sesiones de hoy en esta plenaria. Les invitamos ahora a tomar un café en el hall principal. Muchas gracias.